I'm here today to kick off our tour with the Iowa Secretary of State candidate Matt Schultz and announce our commitment to reducing voter fraud, specifically double voting in both Minnesota and Iowa. The charges raised in recent days, 47 cases of voter fraud in Hennepin County, have called into question the integrity of Minnesota's elections and the performance of Mark Ritchie as Secretary of State. As reported by NPR, 4 of these charges involve double voting, which is in addition to the 35 cases of double voting that are currently being investigated by authorities. In 2008, the United States Senate race was decided by 312 votes. It is inexcusable to have this level of fraud in our system. With this in mind, Matt Schultz and I will be traveling today and promoting our plan to implement photo ID and increase collaboration across state lines. With the electronic ID scanners and shared databases, we will be able to more effectively monitor and reduce double voting. When an individual goes to the polls and scans in their ID, their data will populate the fields and mark them as participated. If that person returns to the polls in another state or precinct, their name will be flagged and marked for review. As our plan is implemented, we will continue to raise awareness and ensure the voters realize that if they attempt to vote in 2 states, they will be caught and that they will be prosecuted. This in turn will reduce the attempts to double vote. I think another venue or advantage to getting together with the Iowa Secretary of State is to establish a relationship and a collaborative to really put out the cooperation with Get Out the Vote, and specifically to encourage people to get to the polls on Election Day. That's one of the other processes that we're going to be talking about as well. And it's time to restore integrity into our elections, and I promise to do so by implementing photo ID as your next Secretary of State. I appreciate you coming this morning, and I will open for questions.
In other states where they use photo ID, is there any hard evidence that it reduced vote fraud from what occurred before they had that system?
You know, I don't know that specific statistics. I know that in Indiana, where they implemented it, the voter participation went up. I have not heard increased incidence or reduction. I think one of the real challenges in the process, particularly in Minnesota, that we have is we aren't looking for double voting up to this point. And I'll accentuate this by saying that these charges have really been dug out by a private institution under private dollars. And so when these were brought forward, that's when the prosecution started. We in Minnesota have not been looking for voter fraud. That's one of the problems that we've had in the past. And I really believe this is just the tip of the iceberg, that there is more fraud going out there than we are able to catch right now, and it's because we aren't looking for it. And that is part of the process, part of the shortfall of this particular regime, Secretary of State, and I think we have opportunity to really start to dig in here and hold people accountable for double voting, for felons being able to vote as they have, and we can clean up the system and make sure that when one person goes down there who's a legitimate voter, that vote counts one vote.
During the 2008 Senate or 2009 Senate trial, the judges had asked Senator Coleman's lawyers whether they were making a case that there was any kind of fraud in the election, and they said they were not. Do you have any reason to believe that the fraud rose to a level that would have changed the outcome of that race?
I think unquestionably. You know, right now, Minnesota Majority has tagged over 600 cases of felons that were able to cast a vote in that last election that should not have. And as a matter of record, felons who are voting, or people that are imprisoned, typically are about 75% Democrat. So when you start to take those numbers and you extrapolate those out, it far exceeds the margin of the 312 that Franken won by. So I think because those discoveries were made after the Supreme Court justices made their decision to uphold that standing, I think there's reason to say, you know, I think there's a probability that that whole thing should have been recalled, and this process should have been reviewed again.
Ritchie and his supporters say that he did advance some proposals to to reduce potential for felons voting, including an idea, a bill that that did allow for the Department of Correction to provide information along with the court system to the Secretary of State's office, and that you were not in favor of that. What do you say to all that?
Well, first, I would say that those were proposed after the 2008 election. And they may have been a response. They would have had no bearing whatsoever on the 2008. And Secretary Ritchie's dereliction of duty to ensure that the felons were taken off the rolls for that election process. In fact, in 2008, a month before the elections, he was notified by Channel 9 that there were felons on the roll. He came out the next day and said, yeah, we're going to take them off the roll. And they didn't do that. The bottom line on those bills that came through in 2009 and 2010 was they did not have photo ID. They did not have significant election reform in them. The one in 2010 made inroads, and that was one that I did vote for because it had some substantial improvements, although it did not have photo ID, and that's at that point when I had basically decided that that would be the hallmark for this campaign. 82% of Americans want photo ID, at least 80% of Minnesotans, I believe more than that. And so this was one of those issues that I believe is on the forefront of this election.
I think the 2009 bill also had a provision that allowed for automatic registration, voter registration of people when they're registering or renewing their license. And the theory behind that apparently was that it would give the Secretary of State's office more time to check people who are registering using their driver's license, and they have time to see if they were felons. Why wasn't that a good idea?
Well, I think there's significant controversy with the Motor Voter Act, which is the one you're addressing here. And I think part of that process is to say there are a lot of people who have access to driver's license who are non-citizens. And if you have an automatic process in which the individuals who are going to get their driver's license are automatically registered to vote, there's a lot of opportunity there for false data entry, for not validating the information, and I think it just opens up another door for people being registered to actually get their driver's license and then automatically being registered to vote when all of that data hasn't been thoroughly researched.
Sort of one of the general criticisms or complaints about photo ID, that ID is an idea, is that it would just basically suppress turnout. That a number of people, senior citizens and others who don't have driver's licenses, wouldn't come out to vote, and that this is really a way to keep turnout low. What do you say to that?
Well, I say the proof is in the pudding. In Indiana, where it was implemented in 2005, 2006, the first year that it was implemented, they saw a 13% increase in voter turnout. And that's in a non-presidential year. Then in 2008, they saw another 2% on top of that 13%. So there, the studies that have been done shows that it actually empowers the minority groups, because now they actually have a vested interest, they have identity, they're on an even playing field with every other voter in the state. And I think in that light, it engenders participation. Also, I believe that because there's such an overwhelming call for photo ID, I think people understand that if you have photo ID requirements in the system, it increases the integrity, it increases the accuracy of the system, and they can be guaranteed that those are legitimate votes. And when people have confidence in their system, they participate. I think conversely, when people think that there's fraud or there's errors in the system, and here's the picture. You know, you're taking off noon time frame to go down and vote, because in the evening you got other stuff going on, you can't get to the polls, and you drive up to the poll booth or polling place and there's a line going out the door because everybody else has got the same idea. And you think, you know what, I haven't got time to do this. And so instead of going in and swiping a card, you're in the back of the line while other people are doing same-day registrations. And so I think the way it's going right now is we disenfranchise those people who are pressed for time on Election Day, and this photo ID proposal really expedites the polling process and I think engenders participation. And I think the other issue, too, is with the seniors and the poor that has been the argument in the past. Understand that this photo ID has been vetted at both the federal Supreme Court level and at the state level in Indiana, and overwhelmingly has been supported and found to be constitutional, that there are no individuals that are disenfranchised through this process. And that actually the Supreme Court ruled in the majority favor, but basically saying any inconvenience that an individual may experience in having to acquire an ID card is far outweighed by the integrity and the confidence that it engenders to the voting populace. So when we start to look at photo ID as a whole, as a policy for bringing election integrity to Minnesota, I think the arguments have been vetted that are being used right now. You know, Mr. Ritchie will bring out this argument that, well, you got these people overseas, and you got the military overseas, and you got all these people that are voting absentee. They're all going to have to get a plane ride, come back to the United States to vote. Well, that's just not so. Because currently we have absentee balloting for our military and for overseas, and I will tell you that right now they're being disenfranchised because less than 28% of our military was able to cast a vote from overseas there. So we can do things differently, we can do things better, and with photo ID and some of the proposals that I've put out there for electronic voting for our military, do with them as a model, use them as a subset, a classic case for email, and then follow up with a hardcore ballot coming in. I think we can begin to take a look at how we can do this process better, particularly for our overseas people, so that they do have a voice. Currently, their voice is marginalized at best. Other questions?
At the risk of repeating yourself
Sure.
and accepting the apologies of WCCO-TV for being late, I wonder if you just want to recap a couple of high points of the campaign.
For the campaign, or what we're on today?
What you're on today.
Yeah, what we're on today is we are, well, if it's okay with you, I'll read through the press release again, if that's all right.
Yeah, because it's short.
Yeah, it's not that long. Well, I want to thank you for coming this morning, and I am here today to kick off my tour with Iowa's Secretary of State candidate, Matt Schultz, and to announce our commitment to reducing voter fraud, specifically double voting, in both Minnesota and Iowa. The charges raised in recent days, 47 cases of voter fraud in Hennepin County, have again called into question the integrity of Minnesota's elections and the performance of Mark Ritchie as Secretary of State. As reported on NPR, 4 of these charges involve double voting, which, in addition to the 35 cases of double voting currently being investigated by authorities. With the 2008 Senate race being decided by 312 votes, it's inexcusable to have this level of fraud in our system. With this in mind, Matt and I will be traveling today promoting our plan to implement photo ID and increase collaboration across state lines. With electronic ID scanners and shared databases, we will be able to more effectively monitor and reduce double voting. When an individual goes to the polls and scans their ID, there will be data will populate the fields and mark them as participated. If that person returns to the polls, either here or in another state or precinct, their name will be flagged and marked for further investigation. As our plan is implemented, we will continue to raise awareness and ensure that the voters realize that if they attempt to vote in 2 states, they will be caught and they will be prosecuted. This, in turn, will also reduce attempts at double voting. And part of our process today is to establish a relationship and to develop a collaboration, not just for voter fraud, but also for participation and sharing of ideas for encouraging voters to get voters out to the polls and to really promote what is our fundamental government right and responsibility for individuals, is to participate in the important activity of voting. So it's time to restore integrity into our elections, and I promise to do so by implementing photo ID as your next Secretary of State. Thank you. And any other questions? You guys have been very gracious. Thanks for getting up this morning this early and showing up. I appreciate it. And we are off to southern Minnesota to hit some spots down there. Did I answer all questions?
Yeah,
okay.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, appreciate it. Is there, I think you gave me